friends, welcome to the 15-minute or less Bible study of Pleasant Hill United Methodist Church for April 1st, 2020. I'm Pastor Stephanie. Welcome. Grab your Bible. Let's get started. First, though, I would like to start with a little bit of an apology. I did tell everyone last week that I was going to go over John chapter 13 today, and I decided, though, as I was studying, that I want to start with John chapter 10 instead. And the reason that I want to do that is because of a simple outline of John. John, in broadest terms, can be divided into four parts. So first we have the prologue, which is 1:1 through 1:18. This is basically the introduction. This is the beginning. This is the Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's the gist of it. John starts by telling us this new beginning, this Genesis. And this message is that God is with us. That's how John starts, to letting us know God is with us. God has come to us to be with us. Then the next part is what N.T. Wright calls the Book of Signs. And that's 1:19 through 12:50. And in this section, there are a bunch of signs that happen that point to Jesus as the Messiah. They let us know that Jesus is the Messiah. And then part 3, N.T. Wright calls this the Book of Glory. And this is the part where Jesus goes to his last meal, he goes to the cross, he dies on the cross, and then he is resurrected. Suffering, death, resurrection happens in the Book of Glory. That's where Jesus is glorified. And then the fourth part is the epilogue. And this is simply the part where the writer wraps everything up. He lets us know the purpose of why he's writing here. Now, we'll only have 2 lessons for Bible study in the Gospel of John before Maundy Thursday, which is next week. So I thought that one of those lessons should come from this part of the Gospel of John. This gives us some insight into who Jesus is, where Jesus is going, how he started out, before we get to this part. So right now, I invite you, just hit pause on the video, hit pause, and then read John chapter 10, verses 1 through 30. John chapter 10, verses 1 through 30. All right, welcome back. So we're not going to start with verse 1. Instead, look at verse 22. And I use, by the way, the New Revised Standard Version. At that time, the festival of dedication took place in Jerusalem. Did y'all hear that? At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. John is setting the stage for us right here, and this little detail is really important for us. The festival of dedication is what we now call Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the celebration of the Jewish people taking Jerusalem back in the year 164 BC. Israel was under the rule of the Syrians, and their emperor Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he decided he wanted to completely Hellenize Israel. In other words, he wanted to get rid of all of the Jewishness of the era. So he took over the temple on December 25th, 167 BC, and he desecrated it by making it a place that people could come to worship him, worship the emperor. What he didn't count on, though, was how upset this would make the Jewish people. So under the leadership of the Maccabees, these brothers, they were known as the Maccabees, they rose up, the Jewish people rose up, and they fought back. And on December 25th, 164 BC, 3 years later, Judas Maccabees cleansed the temple and reconsecrated the temple. It was that dedication that they're celebrating in John chapter 10. Now, this is important to keep in mind because it's providing a certain backdrop. John, the writer here, he's pointing out the fact that Jesus is at a celebration that highlights Jewish leadership. The rest of the story, then, is that 2 of the descendants of the Maccabees, about 100 years after they had taken the temple back, after they had taken Jerusalem back, 100 years later, there's 2 of the descendants, they're brothers, and they're fighting over power. They have an internal fight going on in their family over power. So it's at about that same time, Pompey is taking over the land. He's marching through all the lands. He's taking over all the lands. And then in 63 BC, he comes into Jerusalem, basically walks in. He walks into the temple and he desecrates it by walking into the Holy of Holies. That's the place that only the high priest could go at a certain time of the year. But Pompey just walked right in. And this happened because those two brothers were not leading well. They were so involved with fighting, so involved with picking up power, so involved with being in charge and being right and being the best, that they lost their country. They lost their temple. So we fast forward throughout the rest of their history. Pompey takes over, Rome takes over, Israel becomes a vassal state to Rome, which means that the Jews are still in control, sort of, but they answer to the Romans. So they're in control in name only, but they do what the Romans tell them to do. And the rest of the Maccabees' descendants, they are part of that system for another 30 years or so, until Herod the Great marries into that family, and then he takes over power, and he's named the King of the Jews by Rome in 37 BC. And then in 4 AD, he dies when Jesus is just a young child, and then power shifted to Herod's sons, one of whom was also named Herod. So now that's the background. And it's at this celebration of the dedication of the temple where Jesus says, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. Then in verse 7, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I think that when we read the Bible, we have a tendency to spiritualize things. We look for the supernatural. And I think that part of the reason we do that is because we like for things to feel spiritual and sort of mysterious. But I think the bigger reason that we over-spiritualize the Bible is because we're so disconnected from the history of the time that it was written in that we miss some of the meaning. So here, when we hear the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, we immediately often assume Jesus is talking about Satan. Jesus is talking about the devil. I don't know, maybe he is on one level. But I think now that we know Jesus is at the celebration of the dedication of the temple, and since we know that leadership fell apart because the leaders were more focused on gaining personal power than they were caring for their own, I think we should at least consider the fact that Jesus is talking in very earthly terms. He says, all who came before me were thieves and bandits. I think it's really possible that Jesus is calling out poor leadership. Leadership that prioritizes power and fame and money over people. See, this is why the Romans hated him. This is why the Jewish religious leaders hated him. He called them out. He called out power-hungry, lying leaders who were only concerned for themselves. He called out leaders who capitulated when their power was threatened. He called out religious leaders who led people away from the truth of God and who colluded with governments because it ensured their power and stroked their egos. But Jesus, he's a different kind of leader. He's the kind of leader that shows us that the way of the world is not the best way. So this week, I invite you to read the rest of the Gospel of John and ask yourself, how is Jesus different from the leaders that he's criticizing in chapter 10 and in other places? As the first chapter of John says, Jesus made his dwelling with us so that he could show us the better way. And we'll talk about that next week. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below or feel free to email me at stephanie@pleasanthillowingsmills.org. And please join us for worship on Sunday at 10 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube. Plus, we'll have special Holy Week services next week, Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday at 7 p.m. If you would like to give or if you want more information about our church, please visit pleasanthillowingsmills.org. God bless y'all. Stay home. Stay safe. Peace.